They never recorded this night in scrolls, not in temples, not in the Senate, not even in the gossip-stained letters of Rome's poets, because this night was not meant to be remembered, only felt, only whispered about in gardens, behind silk curtains, and between breaths of forbidden perfume. It was the night where power changed hands without decree, where names were traded without ink, and desires were confessed without words. No one knew who planned it, no one ever dared ask, but every torch that burned, every scent that lingered, every step that led behind the velvet was mine. Tonight I will tell you, not as a boast, but as a confession of the most forbidden night in ancient Rome, and how I made it happen without anyone ever knowing.
The moon had not yet climbed the marble roofs of Rome, but down below the city was already holding its breath. From across 7 hills, cloaked figures moved like shadows, not to the Forum, not to the Senate, but to a single villa no map dared to name. Its entrance was carved in secret, a private archway wrapped in vines of bronze, guarded not by soldiers, but by silence. And then they began to arrive. One by one the guests stepped through the engraved arch, each draped in wool as soft as breath, each hand guided by a torch-bearer and a flower boy trained to walk without sound. No names were spoken, no greetings exchanged, only glances. The slaves led them across scented walkways, sprinkled with rose petals and resin imported from Cyrene, toward a courtyard glistening with oil-lit fountains and burning myrrh. Each footstep sank into velvet sand, each heartbeat echoed like a forgotten drum. They were senators, courtesans, generals, and even poets, but tonight they wore no titles, only masks. Masks made of silk, lined in silver, tied behind hair perfumed with Eastern oils. It is said that during the final century of the empire, there were gatherings so private not even their invitations were written. A name was never enough. One had to know the scent, the color, the pause between 2 candle flickers. And only then did the doors open, the torches burned blue, the flowers gave no fragrance, because all scent was reserved for the night. And this was only the beginning.
They stepped beyond the last column and into breathlessness. The feast hall did not resemble a room. It resembled a vision. A golden atrium stretched wide beneath a domed ceiling woven with thousands of silk blossoms. From above, garlands of jasmine and violet cascaded like rain caught mid-air. Each bloom perfumed not just the room, but the memory itself. And the light, it didn't flicker, it shimmered. Lanterns floated, suspended in crystal nets, casting soft reflections across silk-covered tables that seemed to ripple like water. The entire floor was inlaid with dark mosaic tiles, polished until they mirrored the faces of those who dared look down. This was no banquet. This was a rebirth. Tables ran like rivers, curving, looping, never-ending. Each seat had a name, not written in ink, but sewn into cloth. Napkins were folded like roses. Silverware glinted with etchings of lions and laurels. But no food had arrived yet, because the hall itself was the first course. Even the silence was exquisite, a silence thick with intention, with awe. One guest whispered, "This is not a dinner, this is a spell," and no one corrected her. For it was true. Beneath the floral dome they had not merely gathered, they had crossed into a moment not meant to exist. Some historians deny this hall ever stood. They say no Roman villa could have fit such grandeur. But there are sketches, hidden in the margins of a scroll burned in Herculaneum, traces of an impossible place, of light that danced without flame, of petals that never wilted. And tonight, that place returned, in silk, in scent, in silence.
Nothing in this banquet was casual. Not the glances, not the laughter, and certainly not the seats. Guests did not merely sit, they were placed, positioned with intent so precise it echoed the calculations of war. The oldest senator in gold-trimmed robes took the easternmost seat, facing the garden, yet just beside the unseen host. Across from him, a widow, known for her wealth and silence. Further down, a general, recently disgraced, was flanked by two poets, each gifted in wit, each dangerous with rumor. It was not a dining table, it was a map, a web, a chessboard of power veiled in silk and wine. And then came the toasts. There were no servants to pour. Each guest received their wine from a silver jug passed by hand, always from right to left. The first to raise their cup was never the most noble, but the most useful. In this case, a banker. His cup rose not to the gods, but to peace in the provinces. It was code, a soft message wrapped in ritual. And so the others followed, one by one, each toast a layer, each sip a signal. Some praised ancestors, others praised stability. But beneath each word was a request, a warning, or a deal. A language only those invited were meant to understand. Some historians claim these rituals were merely tradition. But in a burnt library near Cumae, a scroll survives, singed but decipherable. It details a night of wine and whispers, where political factions exchanged favors with every pore. A single note in the margin reads, "Whoever holds the jug holds Rome." No one laughed that night. Not loudly anyway, because in this hall to laugh too soon might mean you misunderstood the game. And when the toasts faded into silence, the room changed again. The torches dimmed, not by accident, but by design. Shadows stretched like velvet. Then a sound, a voice, low, haunting, emerged from behind a curtain. The singer wore no name, only a veil laced with gold thread. And the song was not permitted, not in temples, not in homes. A melody once banned by the Senate for its power to awaken dangerous longing. But tonight it returned, wrapped in voice and incense. The words spoke not of virtue but of hunger, not of gods but of flesh. And as the notes floated through the air, dancers appeared, one by one. They did not enter, they unfurled like silken petals opening at night. Each wore robes, barely robes, spun from thread so thin they were breath. They moved in circles, never touching, yet always near. Every spin, every glance was a question, every sway of fabric an answer. The wine helped, of course, as did the scent, something thick, honeyed, impossible to name. It clung to the arches, it folded into the folds of conversation, it slipped into memory before it even reached awareness. Some said the perfume came from Persia, others that it was made just for this night. A formula lost, a feeling never forgotten. The singer's voice, the dancer's eyes, the air itself all whispered in harmony, "You are safe to desire." And so they did, not openly, not foolishly, but with the caution of those who understood that temptation was not the danger. Denial was. Ancient records never mention this, but in one scroll sealed inside a private tomb near the Esquiline Hill, there is a line in a woman's hand. "They never asked my name, only the song I sang, only the scent I wore." She had no title, but tonight she ruled the room. In that feast hall, entertainment was not spectacle, it was strategy. Every sound, every shimmer, every slow turn of a wrist, it wasn't meant to distract. It was meant to stir, to seduce the truth from guarded lips. And as the music rose, so did the risk. Because in that twilight of voices and veils, power was naked, and no one looked away.
And then came the moment that no scroll described, the moment when perfection held its breath. Every goblet was full, every guest smiled, every dancer bowed in slow unison. Even the air itself shimmered, fragrant, golden, still. It was the kind of silence not born from absence, but from awe. A silence that knew something was coming, that this night, no matter how carefully orchestrated, had reached its edge, the edge before the fall. A senator looked up from his cup. A courtesan's laugh paused too long. A general's fingers tapped once and stopped. This was the moment before, the one history always forgets because it is too quiet, too delicate, too dangerous. In that single breath of stillness, the feast was no longer about food or song or wine. It was about tension, sweet, suspended tension, the way a chandelier hangs, not knowing if it will keep glowing or crash. In the center of the room, a platter of fruit sat untouched. Pomegranates halved, figs spilling with honey, peaches so ripe they wept. And yet no one reached, no one moved, because deep inside they all felt it. This was the turning, the perfect hour before the unraveling, the beauty before the truth, the whisper before the scream. Ancient records, of course, say nothing, but one burned fragment found in the ruins of Herculaneum bore an odd line. We laughed then, and no one knew it was the last laughter of the empire. Was it a metaphor, a joke, or something too real to repeat? No one knows, but on this night it made sense, because something sacred happens when things are too perfect. They begin to crack. And in Rome, beauty was always the mask of power. So they sat there, bathed in candlelight, wrapped in silk, soaked in incense, and they waited, not for dessert,
but for the secret they didn't know they were about to witness. Because every forbidden night has one breath right before the veil falls.
The night was unforgettable. Yet what made it possible was not sung in toasts nor carved in marble. Somewhere beyond the lights, behind the laughter and silk, a whisper moved, not of generals or gods, but of petals. Before the first guest arrived, someone had already spoken, not with words, but with flowers, not sold, not owned, only borrowed, like a secret. And those who knew followed the scent to him, the one who never showed his face, the one who delivered not bouquets, but coated invitations. Now, let us follow that trail into the garden of shadows, where roses lie and names are never spoken.
They called him nothing, because naming him would be remembering him, and no one was ever supposed to. The florist of shadows. He never showed his face, never opened a stole, never carved a name on marble or whispered one on parchment, and yet his presence was unmistakable. Every week, near the hour when Rome fell silent, after the lamps were dimmed and only the perfume of old myths hung in the air, his scent would appear. Floating like memory, resting like intent. No one ever saw the moment of exchange, no hand extended, no coin received, but in doorways and on silk pillows his blossoms would bloom, placed with perfect precision. Lavender for silence, jasmine for curiosity, poppy for sleep or seduction. He didn't sell flowers, he offered messages, fragments of secrets no one dared to speak aloud, petals that held meaning, known only to those who needed them. Hidden truths delivered not in ink, but in scent. The most powerful names in Rome used him, or rather borrowed him, because no one owned him and no one knew where he went after the flowers ran out. It was said he spoke only once, to a child who mistook his silence for rudeness. I am not rude, I am just temporary. And then, like breath in cold air, he was gone. He left nothing but petals, memory and rumor. But in every corner of the most forbidden night in ancient Rome, his scent still lingered, soft, sharp, unclaimed. Some say he was a spy, some say he was a fallen noble, and some say he was never real at all. But no one denies this. If a flower arrived at your door, without sender, without scent, then you were chosen, or warned, or marked, and no name was ever spoken.
He never sold. That was the rule. The florist who dealt only incense and silence believed that ownership tainted intention. So he didn't sell flowers, he rented their meaning. For one night, for one moment, for one message that could not be spoken aloud. And when dawn came, the petals were expected to be burned or buried. It was never about the bloom. It was about what the bloom allowed you to say without saying it. A wreath of iris meant regret without apology. A garland of rosemary whispered, "Remember, but do not return." And a single stem of blood-colored gladiolus, that was an open wound wrapped in silk. Each delivery was made without a voice. The florist's messengers, young, unassuming, draped in plain tunics, carried the bouquets with sacred care. No scrolls, no seals, just scent, just shadow. One whispered request, and the meaning was woven into petals. Those who understood the code answered without words. And those who didn't, they never knew they were being watched, or warned, or invited. There was a reason his flowers were never meant to be kept. Their beauty wasn't in their color, but in their danger. Because behind each fragrance was a choice, sometimes a question, sometimes a warning, sometimes a goodbye. The power wasn't in the flower. It was in the silence it created. Historical secret. The lost writings of Scribonia, an overlooked Roman historian, once mentioned a figure she called Florista absconditus, the hidden florist. She claimed he worked with both nobles and spies, using petals instead of parchment to pass secrets too dangerous to write. The Senate never acknowledged him. The temples never named him. But in the folds of forbidden nights, his flowers ruled like emperors. And still, he owned nothing. He held nothing, just petals, just breath, just a moment that faded before the sun could rise.
Not all secrets were passed in scrolls. Some were carved in stems, pressed in petals, sealed in scent. The secret florist understood that language wasn't always spoken. It could be arranged. One extra thorn meant danger. A wilted leaf on purpose meant delay. And the direction the stem curved could signal where the next meeting would be. To the unknowing, a bouquet was just a gift, but to the chosen, it was a cipher. Entire strategies, political, romantic, or deadly, were once hidden within a handful of lilies. It is said that one crimson tulip placed upside down on a step led to the arrest of a senator in the Palatine. Another time, a single sprig of thyme left in a sandal led a spy to exile or salvation. His clients knew the rules. Flowers must never arrive with a name. No ribbon, no vase, only thread, natural, hand-twisted, and a faint trace of myrrh. If the scent changed mid-delivery, the message was void. If the petals bruised, the meaning was misread. That was the precision, that was the power. But it wasn't just nobles and messengers who used his code. Lovers did too. A rose with no thorns meant, "I forgive." 3 white narcissus meant, "Don't wait." A stem tied with both black and gold string, "Meet me before the empire forgets." Among the forbidden diaries of Scribonia, there is one passage scholars rarely cite. It tells of a night when a gladiator's life was spared because a violet stem had been bent twice, meaning the match was to be halted. The god understood. The emperor never knew. So many things were never said, but they were arranged, and in a city where every wall had ears, silence was the loudest voice. The florist never smiled, never bowed, but his flowers spoke volumes. They asked, they warned, they remembered, and sometimes they said goodbye.
They never meant for Scribonia's pages to survive. She was a woman, a recorder of whispers, never officially commissioned. Yet her parchment pages, fragile, cracked with age, contained the most forbidden truths of Rome's elite. Not military strategies, not laws, but perfumes, petals, and politics. Scribonia knew the florist, or at least, she knew his system. In one passage, she describes how a garland of marigolds wrapped in silver thread warned of a changing loyalty in the Senate. In another, she outlines the night a rival to the empress was banished, not by decree, but by a crown of violets delivered during dinner, seen only by those who understood. Scribonia's work was buried beneath marble floors in a private library never completed. Scholars claimed the texts were decorative fantasy, but deep in their hearts they feared the precision of her records. One page speaks of a forbidden night, the same night we now explore, a night when every flower on the table meant something. A petal placed on a goblet meant, "Watch him." A stem turned east meant, "Leave now." A rose split in two, "Replace him." Scribonia never named names, but she traced every moment. She wrote not for glory, but for the truth that would never be admitted aloud. Historians still argue, was Scribonia real, or merely a legend born of gossip and smoke? But every time an ancient mosaic reveals a rose tied in gold thread, the question rises again. The truth isn't always written in marble. Sometimes it's hidden in the folds of linen, or in the pressed pages of a woman history tried to forget. And so when you breathe in the scent of lavender on a Roman evening, ask yourself, what does it really say? They said the black rose didn't exist. Not in gardens, not in wild fields, not even in the deepest archives of perfumed Rome. It was a myth, a whisper told after wine, and only to those who already knew too much. The florist never mentioned it, never listed it, never even hinted. But on the night the empire's most forbidden gathering unfolded, one was seen. Just one, not in a vase, not in a bouquet. It arrived alone, wrapped in smoke-colored silk. No note, no seal, only a single petal missing, cut precisely as if to mark its arrival and its warning. The servant who delivered it disappeared before the door opened. The guest who received it never spoke again. Some claimed it was only a symbol, a dramatic flourish in a night of illusions. Others knew better. Scribonia wrote of it, one line, hidden between political observations. When the rose is black and alone, even silence begins to tremble. The meaning? Unclear. The effect? Immediate. That night, Toasts stopped mid-air. Laughter slowed. One senator left early. Another sent a whisper to the palace. And still no one said the word. No one named the florist. The black rose didn't speak. It didn't need to. In the language of petals, it screamed, and then, like a shadow turning from flame, it vanished. The next morning, the marble steps of the Aventine bore no trace, no wax drips, no silks, only a curl of unfamiliar fragrance drifting from a window no one remembered being there, a scent of something that was almost forbidden. And this is where we begin. For while the guests returned to their palaces and the night was buried in memory, something lingered, in the folds of robes, in the corners of the mind, and in the stem of that vanished bloom. History did not record the black rose. No statue carries its name. But that night it changed something. A scent was left behind, one so subtle that only the most attentive would catch it. At dawn, as sunlight had not yet silvered the marble, as Rome still slept, a scent that whispered, "Not all secrets vanish with the night." Dawn has not yet silvered the marble colonnades that crown the Aventine, yet a thin ribbon of perfume is already wandering into the cold blue air. It does not rise from a public altar, nor from the smoky braziers of the Subura markets below. It curls instead from a hidden casement in a patrician villa whose facade is still wrapped in shadow. Within, the city's most guarded hour unfolds. While legionaries doze in their barracks and moneylenders dream of ledgers, a single noble woman kneels before a bronze bowl the size of a cupped hand. Between her fingertips gleam beads of camphor harvested from the forests of Syria. Beside them lies a vial of black gold resin, ferried across the sea from Alexandria. She crushes the camphor, lets it hiss against the coals, then tips 3 droplets of resin onto the flame. At once, the chamber billows with a warmth both sharp and sweet, and aroma meant not for gods, but for guardians unseen. This is incensum matronae, the incense of the ladies, a rite whispered from mother to daughter since the first stones of Roma were set. Official histories mention it only once in a torn scroll recovered near the Palatine, where an unnamed scribe scoffs at women who believe perfume can blind the evil eye. Yet the ritual endures, because belief itself is a fortress. As the vapor hangs in veils of silver, the matron murmurs an older tongue, words too soft for marble inscriptions, too fluid for the Senate's stiff records. She is petitioning the coming night, shielding her house, her husband, her unborn intrigues. Outside, the sky remains a velvet bruise, but something colossal is already shifting. A feast no scroll will dare describe is being summoned, and its first herald is this invisible thread of scent sliding across the rooftops like a secret too delicate to name. It is no temple offering. This perfume is born behind silk screens, where patrician women kneel in half-lit chambers. The incense does not rise in public prayers or echo beneath marble domes. It has no priest, no ritual bells, no sacred hymns to accompany it. Instead, it is crafted in stillness, in private rooms that catch only slivers of morning light, where shadows bloom on tiled floors and velvet cushions are pressed by silent knees. These women are not worshipping the gods, they are invoking something older, something nameless. They do not raise their hands to the heavens, they lower their gaze to the coals. What burns here is not sacrifice, it is strategy. This scent is their first defense, their invisible armor, their whispered message to the night ahead: we are not unguarded. The camphor and resin, the flickering flame, the unspoken words, they are not for divine approval. They are warnings, sent into the air like signals only the old spirits would understand. These chambers, veiled in silk, have seen more secrets than any temple. Their walls are not carved with myths, but lined with memory, and memory in Rome is more powerful than prophecy. While the city dreams of markets and courtrooms, these women dream of control. The perfume they release is a map, a route for desires yet to arrive, a scent that will cling to necklines and linger in the folds of gowns. It will travel with them to gardens, to dinners, to banquets by torchlight, and no one will know its origin except those who knelt in the half-light and let it be born. In ancient Rome, the most potent spells were never chanted aloud. They were breathed. Camphor beads crackle in a brass brazier, then melt into Egyptian resin until the air trembles with warmth and spice. The sound is small, almost like the whisper of dry leaves, but in this quiet chamber, every flicker matters. The brass bowl glows with a soft golden light, like a miniature sun hidden inside stone walls. The camphor, gathered from distant forests, holds the crispness of ancient air. It burns fast, bright, alive. And then comes the resin, thicker, darker. It glides like honey, slow and heavy, until it touches the flame and transforms. The room does not burst with fire. It swells with memory. Sweet, bitter, old. The scent is more than smell. It is a presence, a ghost you breathe in, a story that wraps around your bones. It clings to your skin like a silk you forgot you were wearing. It wakes something deep in the chest, something not quite fear, not quite longing. These ingredients were chosen with care, their proportions never written down. They belong to a lineage that trusted scent more than words and silence more than vows. The resin came from ships that crossed hostile waters. The camphor was carried in satchels hidden from tax collectors. Nothing about this ritual is casual. It is not decoration. It is preparation. In ancient Rome, perfume was never just for pleasure. It was a signal, a shield, a subtle spell. When the air trembles, it does not mean danger. It means change. And this room, this woman, she is ready. Because soon others will follow the scent without knowing why. And by then, it will already be too late.
The fragrance masks every mortal odor.
Yet it is also a test. Will the night accept their secret invitation? The incense weaves itself through the air, cloaking the scent of skin, sweat, and salt. No trace of the body remains, only the intention. This is not perfume for attraction, it is perfume for permission. A ritual crafted to ask the unknown for safe passage through what lies ahead. In this quiet room, the smoke curls like a question mark, rising slowly, hesitating, as if it too is uncertain whether the night will answer. The matron does not speak. Her breath moves with the smoke. She has performed this rite before, but each time the outcome is never guaranteed. This is the balance between control and surrender, between presence and prayer, between desire and fate. Outside the chamber, the city begins to stir. A dog barks in the distance. A wheel creaks on ancient stone. But here, in this hidden sanctuary, time is held still, suspended by ash and hope. The fragrance is a veil, yes, but it is also a whisper. A whisper not offered to men, but to the night itself. A whisper that says, "We are ready. We are watching. We are waiting for your sign." For in ancient Rome, not all invitations were delivered by hand. Some were released into the air, unwritten, unseen, but deeply understood by the forces that ruled the dark. And if the flame does not flicker too sharply, if the smoke rises in a steady line, if the scent lingers just long enough on the threshold, then perhaps, just perhaps, the night has said yes.
Scholars whisper of incensum matronae, a warding ritual women devise to blind the evil eye. Only a torn scroll found near the Palatine proves it ever existed. The name is never mentioned in temple inscriptions, never listed in official rites. It passed quietly like a secret between mothers and daughters, sealed in silence and the scent of smoke. Historians speak of it rarely, and when they do, their voices lower, as if afraid that even centuries later the ritual still listens. The scroll itself is nothing more than a fragile fragment, barely readable. The ink has faded, the name of the scribe is lost, but a single line remains. Let the resin rise before the dawn, lest the watchers see the soul unguarded. What watchers? What soul? No one agrees. Some believe it referred to the spirits of the crossroads. Others say it meant jealous neighbors, or the gaze of those who smile with their mouth but not with their hearts. In ancient Rome, to be watched was to be vulnerable. To be envied was to be cursed. And so the women created a veil that no eye could pierce, not cloth, but scent, not color, but memory. With incense, they didn't just perfume a room, they erased its trace from fate itself. And though the rite was never canonized, its scent outlived empires. Even today, when a certain fragrance catches in the wind, some say it's her, a Roman Matrona, still lighting her brazier in a place beyond time, whispering to the dark, hoping no one sees what she carries in her heart. After all, history doesn't remember everything, but smoke remembers what stone forgets.
The smoke has faded now. The flame has dimmed, and yet something remains. Not the scent, but the silence after it. In ancient Rome, a woman's preparation began with perfume, but it never ended there. While the incense drifted toward the rafters, another ritual quietly unfolded beneath her fingertips. A ritual not of fire, but of ink. Hidden behind locked drawers and folded fabrics were ledgers lined in silk, heavy with secrets. Because scent could veil the air, but only ink could shape the guest list of the forbidden.
Long before the first guest arrives, long before the torches are lit, or the wine is uncorked, there is the ledger, wrapped in violet silk, hidden behind the marble base of a household god. It does not wait on a table. It is never placed inside sight. Its presence is never announced, and yet it is the first to arrive and the last to be seen. Before the flowers are arranged, before the music is chosen, before the scent of incense curls through the air, the ledger is already there. Because in ancient Rome, a gathering was not born from conversation or laughter. It was born from intention. And intention lived inside silk, ink, and secrecy. This book is not thick. It does not boast pages. Its power lies in what it omits. A single mark may replace an entire name. A pressed petal may speak louder than 100 words. The host does not write in it with flourish, but with fear. Each symbol is a risk, each placement a calculation. It is a chessboard of desires, veiled in purple. The ledger does not judge who is invited. It simply understands what must be hidden. And so it rests in darkness, beneath the altar of a forgotten god. It listens, it remembers, it waits. No guest will ever see it, but every guest will be chosen by it. No one hosts a forbidden night without it. The ledger does not list names, it speaks in symbols. A lily, a courtesan of rare beauty, a small dagger, a soldier with debts, a purple stain beside a laurel leaf, a senator with weaknesses. The pages are not written, they are coded. This is not a guest list, it is a map of risk, a silent archive of leverage, temptations, and favors owed. The symbols are drawn with care, each chosen for discretion and memory. A coin pressed into wax means someone wealthy but discreet. A broken bracelet, someone watching but not meant to be seen. A single drop of wine near a faded mask, someone who has betrayed once before. The host does not rely on scribes or servants. No one else may see. This book is not copied. It is never read aloud. Its language lives only in the eyes and mind of its keeper. It is not there to remember. It is there to conceal. In a city where power shifts like shadow on marble, secrets are currency, and the ledger is the vault. It protects not only the identity of the guests, but the purpose of the night itself. Some guests are not meant to meet. Some names must never be written beside each other. But with symbols, anything becomes possible. Symbols do not accuse, they do not confess, they simply allow. And in that quiet allowance, entire empires have fallen or begun. Rome understood one thing better than most. Ink can be erased, but symbol endures. The symbols are drawn in ink no one else is allowed to touch. The entire book, its folds, codes, intent, belongs to one person alone, the host, or rather, the unnamed architect of the evening. They may never appear, their name may never be spoken, but every step of the night, every candle lit, every glance exchanged, every silence held too long was built by their hand. The ledger is not a guest list, it is a blueprint, and in it nothing is accidental. Even the order in which symbols are placed carries meaning. Who will enter first? Who must arrive late? Who must never sit across from each other? The ink is mixed by hand, darkened with crushed berries, thickened with resin. It stains the page like a secret burned into skin. Once drawn, it cannot be erased. The architect does not write with emotion. They write with distance, with precision, like a composer writing silence between notes. In Rome, power did not always speak loudly. Sometimes it whispered in gestures, folded corners, the pause before a name. And so the book becomes more than parchment. It becomes an extension of will, a soft, silent decree that no one hears, but all obey. And when the night begins, when laughter rises and the wine flows, no one will look back at the one who planned it, but everything they feel, every thrill, every tremor, was set in motion by a hand that no one sees. Historians uncovered a single scroll in the ashes of Pompeii, faded, burned at the edges, barely legible, but intact enough to reveal the truth. Wealthy Roman women created symbolic guest books to keep names secret, not from guests, but from history itself. The scroll held no complete sentences, no official seal, only scattered fragments, an ink-stained petal, a coded reference to a lady's bloom, and a warning, never write what must not survive fire. It was not a diary. It was a manual, a hidden guide for those who needed to organize what must never be spoken aloud. In a world where alliances could rise or fall with a single rumor, anonymity was not a luxury, it was a strategy. These ledgers were never meant to last. Their pages were often burned before dawn, or buried behind walls, or torn into ribbons and stitched into garments. But this one survived. Somehow, hidden beneath a collapsed roof and molten stone, a single fragment escaped the end of Pompeii, and with it, a whisper from the past that the most powerful networks in Rome were not built in the Senate, nor in temples, nor on scrolls displayed to the public. They were built in bedrooms, in powder rooms, in soft conversations behind fans, and in books that no one was ever meant to find. These ledgers were burned after each event, or buried in walls, or simply vanished. And yet one fragment survived, found again near the Palatine. just enough to prove the truth. Not all stories were meant to be told. Some were only meant to be remembered in smoke and silk. These books were never trophies. They were tools, instruments of trust and caution, created not to elevate their authors, but to protect everyone written between the lines. Their very silence became a shield, their disappearance a promise. To remain invisible was, in Rome, a power greater than presence. The ledger keeper never asked for glory. Their victory was in the fact that no one knew they existed. But sometimes history stumbles. A wall crumbles. A scroll survives, and we are reminded, gently, eerily, that there were once stories so carefully hidden they required no ink to endure, just the memory of a scent, a pressed fold of silk, and a name never spoken but always felt. Which leads us softly into the next secret. For where secrets are written in ledgers, they are purchased first in scent, not in temples, not in stores, but in a market no map dares record, a market of 9 cents, each one more forbidden than the last. Every Friday, just before dusk, near the crumbling arch of Porta Trigemina, something strange begins. A scent, subtle but foreign, drifts from an alley no one names. Not a market on any map, not a trade under any maw. There are no signs, no lanterns, no voices calling for buyers. And yet they come. Hooded figures, gloved hands, whispered questions. No one arrives together, and no one leaves in haste. This is not a place for crowds, it is a place for secrets. What draws them is not coin or gold, it is need. Not every need is urgent, but some are forbidden. They pass beneath broken stone and shadow, where the air is warmer than it should be, laced with something sweet, ancient, and almost alive. The scent changes each week. Some say it follows the moon. Others believe it reacts to the fears of those who breathe it. The market has no stalls, only cloth-covered crates and silent gestures. Bottles are never opened, not here, not where someone might guess their names. This is Rome's unspoken ritual, a transaction not of goods, but of intent. Here, fragrance is currency. A single vial might cost a month's income, or a favor, or a truth whispered at midnight. Because in this city, the most dangerous things are not shouted, they are inhaled. And this scent, soft and strange, does not ask for attention. It asks for memory, for longing, for permission to linger on skin and remain in thought long after the body is gone. No scribe ever recorded this market. No senator ever dared mention it. But those who needed to change a night or a mind or a destiny knew exactly which alley to follow. It is known only through whispers, the market of 9 cents. A gathering of cloaked figures and covered baskets. No shouting, no bargaining, just glass vials exchanged in silence. Inside them, fragrances not sold in public, drops of power, memory, seduction. No one speaks names, no one counts coins. Transactions here are made with glances, with nods, with fingers that brush and retreat. Some vials are wrapped in silk, others sealed with wax and string. All are warm to the touch, as if they had just been held by someone whose story you'll never know. The bottles never rattle. They are carried like letters of intent, like promises, like spells that haven't yet been cast. Each scent has its own silence. One is so subtle it disappears when held too tightly. Another leaves a taste on the air like something half remembered from a dream. No merchant announces what he holds. Buyers don't ask. They already know. This is not a place for discovery. It is a place for recognition. You don't come here searching. You come here to remember what you once desired and to reclaim it. Some buyers come only once. Some return each moon. Some vanish entirely. The 9th vial is never shown. Its existence is only spoken of in passing, always with a note of caution. They say it holds the scent of surrender, the one you wear when you no longer care who you become. In Rome, where names are carved in stone and fates are signed in blood, this market is made entirely of things that vanish: breath, vapor, want. And still it endures. Because even in the greatest empire on earth, there were always things too powerful to name. So they were bottled instead.
One bottle carries the scent of Eastern pheromones, imported with risk, applied with intent. Another, amber resin smuggled from Carthaginian shores. The rarest, a single drop from the root of a Persian ritual plant, said to awaken forgotten parts of the soul. No one knows their true names. They are passed down by touch, not language. The Eastern vial arrives wrapped in cloth marked with constellations, used not to decorate, but to confuse. Its scent does not overpower. It waits, clings, burrows into the skin until it becomes indistinguishable from your own. Worn by courtesans who never spoke first, only listened, and were never forgotten. The amber one burns a little when opened, a heat that curls in the nostrils and spreads down the spine. They say Carthaginian priests once used it before war rituals, believing it turned fear into desire. In Rome, it was outlawed, and yet in certain gatherings the scent was always there, subtle, hidden in candles, or dripped behind the ear like a secret whisper. But the Persian root, that is something else entirely. The vial is no bigger than a thumb, sealed in wax mixed with silver dust. It is not bought casually. It is not worn lightly. Those who seek it are not chasing beauty or charm. They are chasing memory, old memory, bone-deep memory, the kind that doesn't belong to a single life. Just one drop is enough. They say the soul does not react instantly, but hours later, when the body is still and silence returns, something awakens. A name you forgot, a place you never visited but somehow remember, a face that lives only in shadow. This is not perfume. This is invocation. Rome feared these scents, not because they were dangerous, but because they worked, because they remembered too much, and because in a city built on reason and law, there was no defense against what stirred beneath the surface of scent.
According to Pliny the Elder, some of these essences were banned from royal banquets, accused of clouding judgment and softening the hearts of soldiers, yet demand only grew, because what blurred the mind often unlocked desire. Rome feared what it could not contain, and scent, true scent, not flower water or perfumed oils, could not be contained. It drifted past guards, it passed through doors no key could open, it reached the heart without permission. These fragrances were not simply indulgent, they were influential. The Senate tried to regulate them, edicts were written, import routes were watched. Still the vials appeared, quietly, wrapped in cloth, handed over in moments that passed like smoke, because those who understood power knew there are two ways to move a man, with force or with longing. One leaves a scar, the other leaves no trace at all. Soldiers once trained to resist pain found themselves undone by memory. Women once guarded by status were disarmed by scent. Even generals fell, not to poison, not to sword, but to the simple warmth of something they couldn't name, rising from a stranger's skin. That is why the law failed, because desire doesn't answer to decrees, and memory cannot be banned. The scrolls say these essences confused the senses, but what they truly did was awaken them. And in a world of masks and marble, what was awakened could no longer be ignored.
In Rome, scent was not decoration, it was a language, a coded invitation, a secret handshake in vapor. And in this hidden market, each bottle whispered not just of who you were, but of who you might become, if you dared. The people who came here did not come to purchase a smell. They came to change a story, a role, a fate. Scent in Rome had no accent, no social rank. It belonged to no household god, yet it entered every room before its bearer did, and stayed long after they were gone. It was influence without force. It was suggestion without command. To wear the right scent was to speak without sound, and still be heard. Some bottles never left the basket. Their value was not in wearing, but in knowing they were there. Like a knife sheathed but visible, like a key you never use but always carry. The ninth bottle, the one that is never displayed, is spoken of in fragments, in the space between conversations. They say it contains no scent at all, or rather it becomes what the wearer fears most and turns it into something they crave. No proof, no records, just the way someone shivers when a closed vial passes by. In this market there were no receipts, no signatures, only choices, and every bottle held not just scent, but possibility. Who will you be when the scent settles? Who will remember you when it fades? In a city where everything is written in stone, this market dealt in smoke. And yet, what it gave lingered longer than marble. Now the market vanishes with the last breath of dusk. The scents go with it, disappearing into shawls, into pockets, into skin. And for those who walked away with a bottle, their evening is no longer their own. Something else has begun. But not all secrets come in glass. Some are grown, delivered, arranged by hand. And if you followed the scent far enough,
It would always lead, not to a bottle, but to a blossom, and not to a merchant, but to a florist, one who never speaks, one whose flowers were never meant for daylight.
The 9 scents didn't fade, they followed. They clung to sleeves, to curls of hair, to the folds of silken robes as guests left the market behind and entered the marble corridors of power. But where did these scents end up? Not in gardens, not in temples. They drifted further into the heat of kitchens hidden behind the triclinium. In Rome, a kitchen wasn't just a kitchen, especially not the one behind the formal dining hall of the elite. Here, where senators reclined and emperors toyed with olives dipped in honey, the real theater unfolded just beyond the wall. Flames didn't only cook, they whispered, they remembered, and sometimes they warned. The oldest cooks were never dismissed. Their hands were steady not just from experience, but because they had seen too much to forget. Recipes were never written down, not because they were sacred, but because they weren't the point. These cooks were keepers of more than flavor. They were keepers of memory, and sometimes they were keepers of silence. They remembered who sent back the pomegranate glaze last winter, and who slipped a ring into a server's palm when they thought no one saw. They saw alliances form and fall over platters of oysters. They noticed which guest touched their cup too often and who avoided the fish entirely. And they never spoke, because in Rome the kitchen was not a place to talk. It was a place to know. Know who had eaten. Know who would not return. Know when the wine should be sweet and when it should be laced. It is said that in one winter a salt-baked trout arrived first at a grand feast, before any bread, before any blessing. To most it meant nothing, but to those who understood, it was a warning. There is betrayal in this room. The cooks didn't just stir sauces. They stirred consequences. They stirred messages. They stirred the future into every broth, every bite. And above all, they stirred quietly. You'll find no monument for them, no names carved in stone. But in the deepest archives of forgotten scrolls, there is a parchment from Herculaneum. A note scribbled in the corner of a kitchen ledger. It speaks not of ingredients, but of intent, of how certain herbs clouded memory, not to harm, but to soften, to make secrets harder to recall. A light poison, yes, but in Rome, memory could be more dangerous than wine. These cooks, these forgotten alchemists, were not artists. They were architects of perception. And when the banquet hall erupted in applause or silence, they felt it before anyone else, through the flick of a ladle, the crackle of oil, the scent of something just beginning to burn. And so, as the 9 scents of the market slipped into the stew, into the roast, into the sweet perfumed air, a truth was cooked too. A truth no guest could name, but every guest tasted.
They said the cooks never spoke, but their dishes did, especially when the first course wasn't what guests expected. In most Roman feasts, the opening act was gentle. Dates soaked in honey, soft cheese, warm bread. But sometimes the meal began with salted fish. Not by mistake, not by preference,
but by design. To those who knew, this dish was not food, it was a signal. Salted fish, crusted with herbs, served on black ceramic, sent a message only a few could read. There is betrayal in this room. The host wouldn't speak it, the guests wouldn't ask, but everyone would notice. A glance, a twitch, a hand that froze on its goblet. In Rome, silence was louder than accusation. And in the Triclinium, where every toast was a performance and every smile a strategy, food became language. Only the cooks knew how many times this warning had been served, how many lives had turned in a single bite, how many affairs were ended, how many enemies unmasked simply by the choice of a fish before the bread. And it was always subtle. No horn, no alarm, just a quiet tension rising in the air, like steam from a hidden pot. Some said the salted fish came from a specific bay, where the tides were unpredictable and the storms fierce. It carried that spirit to the table, unsettling, intentional. One scroll preserved beneath the ashes of Vesuvius mentioned this ritual. A marginal note beside a recipe. When the sea speaks before the land, trust not the hands that feed you. No name, no explanation, but those words were copied, memorized, whispered in kitchens across Rome. The cooks, silent as ever, did not nod, but they remembered. Always. There was also a pattern, they say. When salted fish came before fruit, it meant suspicion. When it came before bread, it meant accusation. And if it came with no wine, that was exile, social, immediate, irreversible. Guests who received the plate often smiled through it, pretended not to understand, laughed louder, ate slower, and watched. Watched for the host's eyes. For who else had fish? For who didn't? Because the dish was not only about danger, it was about position. Who was being tested? Who was being warned? And who was simply being watched? Some refused the plate altogether, claimed allergy, claimed fasting, but even that was a message. And the cooks took note. Who hesitated? Who devoured? Who looked up with wide eyes, and who looked down and said nothing? Because in Rome, fear had flavors, and betrayal tasted like salt. In Rome, not every dish was meant to delight. Some were crafted to watch, to wait, to reveal. A true Roman banquet was not just about filling bellies, it was about reading faces. Loyalty was not tested by oath, but by appetite. The wine, for instance, on certain nights the vintage wasn't important. What mattered was the herb slipped into it, just enough to be noticed by the tongue, but only if the drinker was cautious. If he flinched, if he paused, he was marked. Then there was the honey cake, usually round, always sweet. It was sliced unevenly, intentionally, and guests were asked, politely, to take their portion. The smallest piece was a test, the largest a trap. Who reached first? Who hesitated? Who watched the others before making a move? In the kitchens of the Triclinium, cooks whispered none of this. They didn't need to. The stew came next. Too much spice, too much heat, just enough to sting the tongue. If a guest complained, it wasn't the flavor that mattered, it was the boldness. Would he insult the host's chef, or swallow his pride and the fire in silence? Everything was calculated, even how much salt was sprinkled on the olives, even the temperature of the bread. If it was too hot, it meant something. If too cold, something else. The language of loyalty was spoken in textures and tastes, and the cooks were fluent. They remembered who ate quickly, who pushed food aside, who asked questions. They observed the hand that trembled while lifting a spoon, the eyes that flicked across the room before a bite. There were no lies in the triclinium, only performances, and some were so good they almost fooled the food itself, but never the cook. Because a cook in ancient Rome was not a mere servant, he was a silent interrogator, trained not with weapons, but with recipes. His ladle stirred more than broth, it stirred truth. They say one evening a guest picked the wrong cake, too large, too confident. The cook didn't say a word, but the next morning the guest was gone. No exile, no charge, just vanished. And everyone understood. No one asked why, because loyalty in Rome was not declared, it was observed, bite by bite, plate by plate. The menu was a mirror, and every guest, whether they knew it or not, sat before a test. In the ruins of Herculaneum, buried deep under volcanic ash, scholars discovered hundreds of scrolls, most too damaged to read. But there was one fragment, tucked between philosophical texts and half-burnt poetry, that whispered something different. It didn't speak of gods or emperors. It spoke of a cook, a man paid not in coin, but in silence. He worked behind the marble walls of a senator's villa, and on one night, one specific night, he prepared the wine. Not the main course, not the sweets, just the wine. But that wine, the scroll notes, had a purpose. It wasn't poisoned, it didn't kill, it blurred. The fragment described a gathering where high names were whispered too close to open ears, where alliances shifted in quiet toasts, where the wrong sentence overheard could end a life. So the wine was steeped in a rare herb, soft, slow, merely undetectable, not enough to harm, just enough to dull. After the feast, guests forgot more than details. They questioned what they saw. Did that senator really slip the servant a note? Did the governor's wife truly weep behind the curtain, or was it only the candlelight playing tricks? The cook's name was not written, but the note ends with a sentence that many historians now debate. He was paid not to flavor the night, but to erase it. In Rome, information was currency, and kitchens were vaults. Some secrets were buried in documents, others in recipes. This scroll, never displayed in museums, was catalogued in silence. It rests in a drawer few open, wrapped in linen, marked only with a faded symbol, a flame within a spoon. The scholars who read it do not discuss it publicly. They say it's too incomplete, too speculative. But in the margins, someone, another hand, centuries later, scribbled a single word. Veritas? Truth? Perhaps. Or perhaps memory, like flavor, can be altered with just a pinch. In a city where betrayal was baked into bread,
and truth could be stirred into soup. Forgetting was not failure. It was a dish, served cold and perfectly timed.
In the kitchens behind Rome's most lavish tricliniums, there were always drawers that never opened during the day, not because they held recipes, but because they held something far more delicate: intent. Every experienced cook carried 2 menus, one for the tongue and one for the soul. The guests only tasted one. The host, however, always knew both. These cooks didn't just know herbs, they knew glances. They could read the way a senator held his spoon, or the moment a wife paused too long before sipping her wine. Their secret ingredient was never named on parchment. It was never bought in the markets. It was chosen quietly. One pouch held dried basil and thyme. The other, a folded piece of cloth, a hairpin, a ring left behind by someone who never came back. Memory infused into flavor, grudges stewed slowly in sauce, and forgiveness was whisked into honeyed glaze if the cook deemed it worthy. One story, passed from kitchen to kitchen, told of a cook who served no entree that evening, only bread, each piece torn unevenly. The guest who received the largest was the one meant to be spared. No one said a word, but after that night, one seat remained empty. The wine was poured, but no glass lifted. Every chef knew memory could not be erased, but it could be blurred, redirected, rewritten, like ink dissolved in broth. What you tasted could become what you believed, and what you believed could shape the empire's future. Some say these cooks were not just servants, they were guardians of Rome's silence, of its shadows, of its choices unspoken. One scroll, hidden behind a tile in a villa wall, spoke of an ingredient with no name. A handful of dust placed beneath the roast, not for taste, but for timing. The guest who coughed was the one who would be watched. The cook's nod was a verdict, his recipe a map of intention. The guests never noticed. They only complimented the tenderness of the meat, the sweetness of the glaze. But the night shifted quietly, exactly as planned, because sometimes power is not in what's served, but in what's never spoken of again. And in the kitchens of Rome, every silence had a flavor. You just had to know how to taste it.
Music at Roman banquets was not composed to please. It was designed to observe. Flutes didn't play to fill silence. They played to follow footsteps. And not just any footsteps, but those of guests whose arrival changed the room's temperature. A soft trill on the SYRINX when a certain senator entered. A pause in the kyphara when someone lingered too long by the wine. These were not melodies. These were signals. And the musicians? They were not hired to perform. They were trained to notice. They memorized faces, timing, glances. They marked when a smile didn't match a tone,
when a greeting arrived too late, and each note they played or didn't play was a mark in a language few ever learned. Hidden behind colonnades or perched in shadowed balconies, they weren't watched, they watched. And the guests, draped in silk and scent, rarely realized their every step was being read in music. Some claimed they felt haunted by certain melodies for days after a banquet, as if the tune followed them. But in truth, it wasn't the tune. It was the memory of being seen, without knowing by whom. In the empire's most forbidden gatherings, music wasn't ambiance, it was architecture. It framed the power, mapped the tension, and sometimes, if one listened carefully enough, it warned.
Some musicians trained not in melody, but in message. They played in keys known only to the host and the guard. 1 pluck meant watch, 2 meant wait, a dissonant chord, danger. Hidden behind velvet curtains or above the banquet hall, these players never looked up. Their eyes stayed down, but their music, it listened for truths. In the house of the elite, trust was too fragile to be spoken aloud. So it was composed, 1 note at a time. Sometimes the lyre was tuned a half-step sharp, so that only those with trained ears would hear the shift. And if the rhythm stuttered just once, it wasn't a mistake. It was a command: stop, do not speak. One noble family even employed twins, identical in face, but one trained in cithara, the other in SYRINX. One played from the west alcove, the other from above the servant stairs. When they played together, it was a signal to begin the seating. When one stopped suddenly, it meant someone was watching. No guest ever saw them. That was the point. Their presence was in the sound, never the sight. And on nights when politics mingled too close with pleasure, the music was the thread that held the room together. If a secret had to pass from one noble to another, it didn't move by hand, it moved by harmony. A trill at the right moment, a change in tempo, a subtle silence. Rome was a city of echoes, and the TRICLINIUM was its chamber of coded song. Instruments were tuned like minds, delicate, precise, and powerful. And when the musicians vanished at dawn, so did the truth they carried, because what was played was never written.
Every performance was prearranged, not to impress, but to inform. A rising tempo meant the honored guest approached. A shift in rhythm indicated a message passed. Entire feasts unfolded with soundtracks designed to mirror and manipulate the mood. Musicians weren't entertainers, they were narrators, silent ones. Behind the curtains, their fingers moved with precision, not born of emotion, but instruction. The notes were not improvised, they were assigned. Each sequence tailored to a gesture, a glance, or a glance avoided. It was said that one noble family commissioned an entire suite of music with only one purpose: to expose lies. When the strings quickened just after a toast, and the flute slipped into a minor key, the guards would know to watch the speaker more closely. If the melody circled without resolution, it meant the answer hadn't been truthful. And so the music danced, quietly revealing what the room refused to say aloud. Some hosts went further. They matched specific notes to guests' steps, a short trill for cautious allies, a long, steady note for old rivals, a sequence of rising scales for spies whose allegiance remained uncertain. In one case, the lyre player held a final note too long, and it was enough. The guest stopped mid-sentence. The conversation turned. The planned betrayal never occurred. No word spoken, just a note. Some guests believed the music followed them. Others knew the truth. It led them. Composers of such scores weren't known publicly. Their identities were hidden, often erased. Some were former spies. Others were slaves who earned their freedom by composing silence into structure. Their work was paid in secrets, not coin. And what they crafted wasn't a melody. It was choreography, each note a step, each pause a breath. In Rome, music wasn't sound. It was strategy. The Triclinium wasn't a dining room. It was a stage, and every guest, whether they knew it or not, danced to a story they'd never heard, but couldn't stop feeling.
In stone-carved music tablets from Nero's time, researchers found notations that didn't match any known musical scale. These were not melodies to be sung. They were patterns, codes. Embedded within seemingly harmless rhythms were instructions, intended not for ears, but for those who understood silence between notes. Historical fragments now forgotten by textbooks suggest some Roman musicians were never meant to perform for pleasure. They were couriers, sound couriers. Their stage was a facade. Their true purpose, transmission. Instead of parchment, they carried messages within cadence. A modulation could mean move tonight. A sliding fifth might say, the deal is off. When a specific refrain repeated 3 times, it marked a silent vote taken during the feast, without a single hand raised. One such musician was recorded in the suppressed memoirs of Scribonia, the forgotten historian. She noted how, during a tense dinner at the imperial court, a flute solo included an unexpected pause, lasting the length of a breath too long. The empress never noticed, but the guard shifted. A plan unraveled. The soloist never looked up, never slowed down, but she had spoken, with tones. The system required precision, yes, but also perfect memory. Sound couriers were trained from youth, often in secret temples, where they learned to repeat entire communications not with words, but with intervals. They would be placed in noble houses as entertainment, but at night they rehearsed orders given in silence, practicing over and over until their instruments whispered the secrets of the state. If caught, there were no letters to burn, no scrolls to eat, only vibrations in the air, and that the wind would carry away. Some scrolls found in Herculaneum describe musical training that included eye control, posture, and breath discipline, not for art's sake, but to prevent accidental leaks. Their music became more than sound. It was encryption. Every trill a symbol, every rest a choice. It is believed that one banquet in Rome was entirely orchestrated by sound couriers, each musician unaware of the other's full message, but together completing a conversation that never reached human tongue. And then, at the end of the night, when guests clapped and praised the beauty of the music,
The true message had already flown, past ears, past walls, into shadows that knew how to listen. As the banquet neared its peak, the music always changed, slower, softer, almost melancholic. That was no accident. The final song was always a cover, a disguise for departure, a signal to close doors, dim lights, shift the tone. Not all guests noticed, but those who did, they knew something was about to end, or begin. The flutes gave way to strings, the drums grew quiet, even the laughter, so loud an hour before, seemed to echo now. This was not a mistake in tempo. It was calculated descent, a descent into memory, into pause. Musicians trained for years to perform the final note, not because it was difficult, but because it had to mean everything and nothing at once. It had to land softly, disappear gently, and yet stay long enough for the attentive to feel its warning. In one banquet, remembered only in an old senator's illegible diary, the final tune lasted 12 breaths longer than usual. A diplomat rose to excuse himself before the last chord. He never returned. No one spoke of it. No one needed to. The final note had already said what must be said. And in Rome, where words were dangerous and gestures watched, the ending of music became the beginning of truth. For some, it marked the cue to exit unnoticed. For others, it was the sign to begin. Deals struck, secrets exchanged. Some even claim the real banquet, the true one, always began after the final song. That's when the rules blurred. That's when eyes lingered longer, hands wandered further, and nothing was written, but everything was decided. And the musician, they bowed, smiled faintly, and vanished, the sound fading not only from the room, but from memory itself, just like they were trained. Because the last song wasn't for applause, it was for silence. It was to bless the night and bury its truths. And in that silence, as the last vibration trembled through the marble floors, one figure always rose. The one who hadn't played an instrument or sung a note, but whose presence now filled every glass, every heart, and every dare. The arbiter BIBENDI, master of the wine, keeper of the flow. Not the music of strings, but of liquid fate. If the musicians shaped the mood, then he would shape the truth that followed. He didn't ask you what you wanted to drink. He decided what you needed to remember or forget. But that is another tale, another rhythm. Let the final note fade now and follow the sound of the first pour.
He did not wear a crown, nor carry a blade. Yet in the most powerful rooms of Rome, his presence made men nervous. The arbiter BIBENDI, the one who poured, who decided, not just how much wine, but to whom and when. a role hidden behind laughter and toasts, but those who watched closely knew better. At banquets where power flowed more freely than wine, the one with the jug held more than grapes. He held futures. He moved with practiced slowness, never rushed, never distracted. He noticed who refused a refill, who gulped too quickly, who tried too hard to look invisible. He never asked questions, but he gathered answers, quietly, efficiently, and with every pour he made decisions no one noticed until it was too late. He poured less for the man whose hands trembled, more for the woman who smiled too easily, a little extra for the senator whose vote was wavering, and none for the one who might not survive the night. The arbiter didn't speak much. His job was not to entertain, but to orchestrate. In silence, in scent, in glass. The clink of goblets was his dialogue, the raised brow his punctuation. There was a rhythm to his service, a tempo like the musicians who played from behind the curtains, except his music was made of choices, delays, glances, and the precise weight of each second between pours. If the musician signaled danger in chords, the arbiter signaled intent in shadows. He did not belong to the host, nor the guest. He served the moment, the balance, the fragile current of trust that ran under the surface of the feast. And like any good conductor, he knew when to let the music swell and when to let it end. Sometimes a guest would look into their cup and pause. The color seemed richer, the scent stronger. Had something changed? They wouldn't ask. That was the unspoken rule. You don't question the one who serves you the truth, disguised in sweetness. He knew what each cup could cause: sleep, bravery, forgetfulness, or fear. But it was never just about the liquid. It was about the timing, the mood, the story unfolding between bites and glances. The arbiter BIBENDI didn't wield weapons. He wielded memory. In a world where secrets passed faster than scrolls, he was the one who remembered what everyone else was trying to forget. And that night, the most forbidden night, as the harp slowed and the lights began to dim, he poured one final cup, slowly, silently, and looked into the eyes of a man who didn't know he'd already been chosen.
First cup, polite. It was tradition, a warm welcome, a signal that the night had begun. It meant nothing more than presence. Second cup, expected, social protocol, the host's way of saying you're still included, still trusted, still safe. But the third was a language all its own. It wasn't just wine. It was selection. It was intent. At Roman banquets, the arbiter BIBENDI didn't just control quantity. He controlled the rhythm of revelation. The order of the cups became the order of fate, and guests knew it. That's why they watched. Not just who drank, but when. If your third cup came too soon, something had shifted. The conversation around you might stay the same, the laughter might continue, but the glances, subtle, nervous, too brief to trace, would begin, and someone at the table would whisper silently to themselves, "He's been chosen." For what, though? That was the question. Favor, promotion, or disappearance? The cup didn't say, but the timing did. In the language of the banquet, where music hummed codes and dishes sent warnings, a cup could declare a man's future more clearly than any decree. You see, it wasn't the wine, it was the eyes that followed it, the silence that clung to it, the way the hand that poured it paused, just a breath longer before the final tilt. The guests were not drunk, not yet. Their minds were sharp, alert, because in those moments every small gesture became magnified. Sometimes the third cup was delayed on purpose, held just out of reach. The guest would laugh politely, but inside he would wonder, why not me? Why him? And in that wondering he would reveal his own ambitions, his own fears. The arbiter was watching, measuring, not just what they drank, but what they daren't to say. Tacitus once wrote that the arbiter BIBENDI was not merely a servant, but a psychologist in shadows, a manipulator of moods, a master of pressure. And this was his game board: cups, wine, silence, and glances. 3 cups, always 3. But what mattered was the space between them. How quickly the first became the second. How suddenly the third appeared. Or didn't. Some guests played along. They toasted loudly, hoping to deflect attention. Others sipped slowly, trying to stay invisible. But the truth was, if your name had already been decided, the wine would find you. One evening, it was said that a guest was offered a third cup within the first 15 minutes of the feast. The others hadn't even touched their second. He smiled, raised his goblet, and drank. But when the torches dimmed that night, he wasn't among those who left. No one spoke of it. That was the rule. The cup was the message. And once it was emptied, there was nothing left to say. In Rome, to drink was to declare, to be offered was to be seen, and to receive the third cup was never a coincidence.
He watched who drank quickly, who hesitated, who reached again without thinking. The arbiter BIBENDI was no servant. He was a mirror, a quiet reflection of the room's tension, hidden behind the gentle sound of pouring. He knew that power never sat still. It fidgeted, it tapped fingers, it sipped to buy time. It laughed too loudly and blinked too little. And so he watched, not with suspicion, but with calculation. He didn't listen to the words, he listened to the silences between them. At the table, every man wore a mask, but the hand holding the cup rarely lied. Did it tremble slightly? Did it tighten around the stem? Did the guest drink with ease or too eagerly, as if to forget? Wine was not just a drink. It was a revealer of intentions, of ambitions, of fear.
And in that slow dance of glances and glasses, the arbiter kept score. He noticed the guest who always filled his own cup uninvited, a sign of overconfidence. He noticed the one who waited to be poured, even when no one offered, a sign of self-doubt. And when someone refused the second cup altogether, that was a message, a shield, a line drawn. Do not try to read me. But the arbiter read anyway. He had been trained not in wine, but in weakness. He remembered what Tacitus wrote: the true judge of character is not speech, but stillness. And in the stillness of a full cup untouched, he saw more than words could say. One evening, a guest reached for his cup before the arbiter had touched the jug. Just a flick of impatience, just a second too soon. The arbiter paused, poured nothing, and turned away. The guest's fingers froze in midair, unsure whether to pretend it was a joke or a mistake. It was neither. Later that night, that same guest was left off the final toast, his name omitted, and that too was a kind of message. The arbiter played no instrument, yet he orchestrated the room with pauses, with refills, with the precise weight of silence. If someone smiled too often, he wondered what they were hiding. If someone drank too little, he questioned what they feared. If someone's eyes darted toward the door, he knew they were already somewhere else in their mind. Wine was liquid psychology, and the cup a confessional without words. To some, it was just a drink. To him, it was data. He didn't pour for thirst. He poured to test, to tempt, to measure. And if he ever poured just a little more for someone, just a fraction higher than others, it wasn't because he liked them. It was because he wanted to see what would rise or break.
According to Tacitus, some arbitri bibendi were not born into service, nor trained in taverns. They were former philosophers, scribes, men who had once debated ethics in marble courtyards, who knew not just how to pour, but when to pause. They wore the robe of a servant, but behind their quiet smile was the mind of an observer, a student of the human condition, one sip at a time, one silence at a time. Their job was never to intoxicate, it was to influence. They didn't just pour wine, they poured emotion. Control was subtle. The third cup, the delayed refill, the empty vessel placed before a guest who had insulted someone earlier. A room's atmosphere could shift with the angle of a wrist, with the delay of a heartbeat, and they knew exactly how to use it. They were emotional engineers, managing pride, diffusing envy, feeding ego just enough to loosen a tongue, or steadying hands just enough to stop one from shaking. A recorded banquet from 63 A.D. described an arbiter who noticed tension between two guests seated across from each other. Their words were polite, but their shoulders were stiff, their eyes evasive. Rather than speak, the arbiter simply refilled one man's cup twice, then skipped the other. It seemed like an oversight. It wasn't. The ignored man flushed with offense. but the tension had been surfaced, and once visible, it could be dissolved. Another story tells of a woman known only as Livia, who was invited to a feast under false pretense. She had secrets, dangerous ones. The arbiter, having been briefed in private, gave her inly watered wine, not to mock, but to protect. Her mind needed clarity that night, not haze. Her silence saved 3 lives. These weren't accidents. These were strategies. And the arbiter was not improvising. He was reading a room like a text, like a coded scroll. He understood the language of glances, of nervous laughter, of too long pauses. He was, in many ways, a storyteller, but his stories were not told in words. They were written in the dance of glass, hand, and gaze, and they were read only by those who knew to watch. Tacitus wrote that one arbiter had once been a pupil of Seneca, another of Epictetus. Stoic minds, trained to master their own emotions and then manipulate others without violence, without commands, just a gesture, just a pore. The robe they wore was simple, the ladle unadorned, but the decisions they made could steer reputations, end affairs, prevent war, or start it. When guests toasted, it was the host who smiled, but it was the arbiter who determined whether that smile would last. Because behind every full cup, behind every half-drained chalice, there was not just drink, there was intention, there was persuasion, there was silence used like ink. And the arbiter wrote not with a pen, but with the rhythm of the pour.
And then came the final pour. It was never marked with fanfare, no horn, no announcement, just a shift, a breathless pause in conversation, a tremble in the candlelight. That last swirl of red in the glass wasn't just wine, it was a signal, a conclusion, a door about to close or quietly unlock. The arbiter moved with intention, his hands steady, eyes never looking at the glass but at the guest, sometimes at 2 guests. The pour didn't favor the loudest, nor the most powerful. It found those whose secrets had settled too close to the surface, those whose laughter rang too sharp, or whose silence had lasted just a second too long. Because in Rome, the most dangerous thing was not the dagger, but the cup that followed the 3rd toast. The final pour wasn't about the wine. It was about judgment, about resolution. No one dared to ask for it, but when it came, they knew. Some guests smiled, others stiffened. A few excused themselves, stepping outside into the night air that suddenly felt colder, and some never left at all. The feast continued. The music softened. The host clinked his cup to toast a new alliance, but the true reckoning had already happened, quietly, in the space between one blink and the next, between the lip of the cup and the first touch of tongue. The final pour was never about the wine. It was about the memory it sealed, or the memory it erased. Because in those final moments, when the room hummed with candlelight and sighs, the arbiter did not just end a night. He ended a story, or started another. Historians would later puzzle over why certain alliances collapsed overnight, why some senators disappeared, why a lover never returned. But those who had watched carefully, who had counted the pause, would understand.
Behind the elegance of the banquet, behind the laughter and the silks, behind the flicker of gold in every chalice, decisions had been made, unspoken, undeniable. And as the last candle melted to shadow, and the music dwindled into memory, the arbiter stepped back into silence, his role complete, his influence invisible but final. In that stillness, when no one dared to toast again, a new night began, one of whispers, of velvet, of choices that could not be undone. Because not all banquets ended when the guests departed. Some continued, beyond the doors, beneath the dusk, where secrets walked softer than footsteps. Welcome to velvet dusk.
And so the wine was poured, not just into goblets, but into secrets, into silences, into destinies yet uncorked. The guests had laughed, they had danced, they had eaten dishes older than memory, and drank oaths that tasted sweeter than truth. But what they did after the toasts, that's where the empire changed. Behind the velvet curtains, beyond the scented halls, a second night was waiting. Not louder, not grander, but darker. Where masks spoke louder than names, and what bloomed wasn't roses, but quiet power. This was only the first half of the night, the half you could almost speak of. The rest, the second feast, the garden that didn't sleep, the whispers that rewrote Rome. Watch part 2, where memory ends and mythology begins, where the empire didn't just dine, it trembled.